for about a year and a half. So initially I was working with them as a freelancer because I do a lot of copywriting and digital marketing stuff. And then I've been with them full time in the office now since August last year. And previous to that, I was working with Jascots, which is how I know the owner. So just to give a bit of background about Oeno and what we do, it was founded about 5 years ago by Daniel Carnio, who's Italian. He knows a huge amount about wine. He's trained as a winemaker, and then he decided to set up his own wine investment company. So that's the main focus of what we do. So helping people to invest in wine safely and to maximize their profits in the market. And then since last year, so about spring of last year, we opened the trade side of the business. So we're selling fine wines direct to top restaurants, hotels, bars, mostly in London. And then our next project, which is really exciting, is Oeno House, which will be in the Royal Exchange building, so in the heart of the city. And that's going to be more of a kind of retail focus and a showroom, so people can come down and taste wines that you wouldn't really get to taste anywhere else. So that's going to be something really unique. It's going to add a lot of value to the city.
Okay, and how about yourself? And were you like, what do you study wine? I mean, your first degree, or what sort of like a background you have enable you to actually entering into a fine wine investment company?
I think it's quite interesting to share my story, because I don't really have like a traditional career trajectory of like I started working in this company and then kind of moved up. So I studied liberal arts, so that's like the American college system where you do loads of random stuff like philosophy and languages and history. So that was really good grounding in terms of marketing and being able to research. And at the same time as doing that, I also started to get really interested in wine. So the background to that is I took a stereotypical gap year and I went to South America, Argentina, and traveled through the vineyards in Mendoza and saw all that kind of wine culture. And that was the big hook for me. So I'd started doing WSET courses alongside my degree. So I did the levels 2 and 3. And that kind of really laid the foundation for my career going forward. And then I so after graduating, I went back to Argentina for a couple of years and just got involved in the wine industry there. Started working with a small exporter, working a lot with a lot of American clients, and just learning about wine. I think that's a really great thing to do, just throw yourself into it and learn as much as you can, especially at the early stages of your career. So that was my first kind of experience in wine. And then I moved to Spain. So I was in Spain for about 3 years. And that was a completely different experience of the wine industry, because I don't know if any of you have worked in America or in the New World, where it's very dynamic, and you can kind of make your own way a little bit, whereas Spain and Italy and France are similar. It's much more rigid, traditional kind of wine industry and wine culture. So that was a challenge, and I went to a lot of interviews. Was very, very difficult, and in the end I decided to set up my own business. So I started doing wine tours and wine tastings, and that's when I developed like the freelance side as well. So I was doing a lot of copywriting, anything really, just to kind of learn more about wine and make a living. Yeah. And then, so after 3 years in Spain, I came back to London, so about 2 years ago. And I started working with, firstly with Jeroboam's, which probably a lot of you have heard of. They're based in London. They have quite a few shops, which they have more of a fine wine focus. So that was kind of my first real exposure to fine wine. And then I moved to Jascots, where I was working more with, on the buying side of things. and again, completely different experience, but really, really valuable. I think to see both sides of it, more the retail side and then the buying kind of wine merchant side as well. And then, so last year in August, I made the transition over to Oeno full time. And then, now much more focused on marketing rather than the buying or other aspects.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned something about your experience working in the Oeno, because I know you started with as a freelancer, writing all the content. You're the content editor for them initially as a freelancer, and then promoted recently. And would you be able to share a little bit about how you get the promotion? I know that there's a little story behind, so would you like to share that with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different things to say here, and I think one of the most important things is to know what you want, and to have, whether that be a 1-year plan or a 2-year plan, but to know where you're actually going. And I think it's always worth taking the time to sit down and say to yourself, this is where I am now. Where do I want to be in this amount of time? So that was always something that I had in mind, going into this role, as you said, to start with, focused on copywriting and content. My eyes were always kind of on what's the next step. And I suppose I was fortunate in the sense that Oeno is a very young company. It's growing very quickly, and there's always so much more to do. So it was fairly easy for me to kind of step in and find ways that I could add more value, and kind of create a role or a path for myself. And then in terms of actually asking, I think that's something that's really difficult for a lot of people to do. And especially for women, we think, oh, we shouldn't ask, or we shouldn't kind of make a fuss. I think that's, the key is just to kind of see where you can add that value. And once you've done that, you just have to push yourself out there and say, this is what I'm worth, this is what I should ask for. And at the end of the day, it comes down to just sitting down with your manager or with your boss and just saying, this is what I've achieved, this is what I would like to do in the future. Do you agree?
Yeah, so I think that's really something quite sort of encouraging. I think it's because Alice didn't wait for the opportunity to come. She asked for it and she got it. So I think that's something really sometimes just need to remind ourselves, we can do it because we do have a value to the company. I think that's something that I always remember when we were sharing, when you mentioned that to me earlier. Okay, and then the next thing I think is probably quite interesting for me and also for our participant is, what is the difference between, it is a wine industry, but is there a real difference between a fine wine company and a normal wine merchant or normal wine importer? I mean, because you have experiences in both fields, so do you notice any similarities and the differences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And since you asked me, the other day, I've been thinking about it a bit more. Because I think there are really important differences. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all selling wine, but perhaps to give a comparison, it's like a good quality high street store like Gap, and then at the other end of the scale, you've got something like Chanel. You're selling a product that is different. It is a luxury good at the end of the day, and brands like Penfolds and DRC and all of those really high-end wine brands, they are luxury brands. So there are differences in terms of marketing. If you look at the branding for some of the top wines, it's very, very carefully considered. Everything is done perfectly within the brand style. It's a different approach, I would say. And that comes on to the second thing, which is who you're selling the wine or marketing the wine to is different as well. And that applies for, in the trade, your trade customers are different, and also your consumers. And something that I've really noticed is people who are buying fine wine, they tend to know a lot about the wines. You know, they know the kind of wines they like, they know the vintages they like. They're very specific, and sometimes it sounds a bit negative, but you know, they are demanding, and you have to have that level of service and that level of customer service, marketing, branding to meet those expectations. So I think there is a big difference in terms of that. And maybe, I mean, people say, you know, fine wine is a bit less innovative. It's, you know, maybe a bit more traditional. I think that's something that's changing fast. And I think that's something that, you know, we're going to see a lot of change going forward as well. You have the traditional fine wine merchants. I'm not going to name any names, but you know, I assure you, you know who they are. And what we're doing, especially with the Oeno, is really trying to modernize that, trying to bring that more in to connect with like the bit younger audience, you know, a bit more kind of cool, trendy branding style. So I think we are going to see a lot of change in the next few years of how fine wine portrays itself.
Yeah, I think that leads me to the next question. I mean, now, because everyone is staying at home, it's, you know, we're in lockdown because of this virus, and then we hear all this story about hospitality industry. You know, most restaurants that are all, you know, closed, and on-trade business has been affected big time. In terms of fine wine, I mean, your client base, they are completely different. They are not, you know, restaurants and all that. I believe they are all like private customer kind of, is that kind of relationship? And is it being affected at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So trade sales, definitely, you know, across the board, I think there's been a lot of change, shall we say. But one of the things that kind of distinguishes fine wine, especially during these kind of crises, is that it tends to be very stable. You know, we've seen Livex has released a lot of data recently, which is a fine wine trading platform, and prices are staying pretty stable. There's a little bit of downturn, but compared to general markets, things are pretty stable. And I think also that shows that people are still buying fine wine. You know, people who are sitting at home, not much to do, you know, especially higher net worth individuals, they're still going to go out and buy those wines to enjoy at home. And something one of my colleagues recently pointed out is when there is a recession, and people are stuck at home, you know, they can't go to a restaurant. And if they would go to a restaurant and order a £200, £300 bottle of wine, they can sit at home and they can buy a £200 bottle of wine, and it's going to be, you know, far better quality wine than the one they would have got in the restaurant. So I think people are kind of upgrading in that sense as well, getting more for their money. Yeah.
Okay, so so the next question for you will be probably on more like you know, your job basically. So is there a normal day for you, or what is a normal day look like for head of marketing in a fine wine investment company?
Yeah, the short answer is no. Every day is different, which is something that's really fun, and especially because we are in quite a dynamic young company, so there's always new projects going on. But yeah, just to give a kind of a snapshot of the things that I get up to. So this week I've been working a lot on Oeno House, which is the kind of retail showroom side of things. So that can include things like commissioning illustrations of the outside of the facade, also commissioning wine bottle images to use on the new online shop. A lot of writing normally, so writing tasting notes, writing articles, a lot of kind of looking on websites, so going on Livex and reading their fascinating reports. Some are more interesting than others, and then seeing how we could use that information, that data, and things like, you know, looking at ad campaigns, social media, how we're using social media effectively. So it's pretty varied day to day. There's always something new to get stuck in with.
Okay, never boring. And
Yeah.
I actually think I should have asked my next question first, but there you go. I mean, I've done some research about, what fine wine really means. I mean, every wine expert has their own, definition about fine wine. And in your company, or, from your own opinion, what is a fine wine? I mean, how do we define it? Is it something like we can put a certain price tag, or is there a different, definition?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really difficult thing to define. And I think one way to break it down would probably be to almost divide into two categories, and to say, these are the classic traditional fine wines that everyone knows. So that would be things like, of course, DRC. Um, what was the other one I said earlier? Yeah, Screaming Eagle. All of those really top classic wines, where it's, if there's kind of a checkbox and is this a fine wine, obviously it would be yes. So there's that side, and then I think there's also another side, which would be fine wines, maybe from newer wine producing countries. So a good example would be China. So 15 years ago, I think it'd be fair to say there was no fine wine coming out of China. And now you've got some really fantastic wines that are coming out, and they might not yet be classic fine wines, but they're wines that are getting really, really good reviews. They're building up a solid kind of base of collectors across the world. So I think we have to be a little bit open-minded in how we define fine wine, and price is not always the best definition.
Okay, so then if you can you give us a kind of an idea that to be selected as one of your supplier into the fine wine category, what kind of criteria will that be? So for example, you say, new and immersion, but then is there something like more specific that you are, a fine wine investment company is looking for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a few different things there. So specifically talking about investment, I would say yes, we are looking at newer winemaking countries. But then again, most of the wines are coming from the classic traditional, places like Barolo, Bordeaux, Burgundy. Most of them are coming from those places. And I guess it kind of takes time for a wine to kind of work the way up the ranks. So we have our kind of wine experts who are constantly monitoring things and picking things that are coming up on the radar. So that's one side of things. And then the other side of things, more kind of trade sales, so selling fine wine to the trade. I think that's where you have a bit more flexibility, and you can introduce, more kind of exciting or younger wineries. So one good example is Silver Heights winery in China. Mm-hmm. So we've been working with them since January of this year, I think. And they produce, really, really fantastic wines. They don't yet have the global recognition to say this is an investment wine, you should buy this wine, necessarily. But it's something that has been really, really popular with the trade. An up and coming Chinese winery that has a huge amount of potential. I think there's those two different ways of looking at it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the last question for me before we open up the Q&A session to everyone is, in order for people to get into a fine wine industry, whatever, like a fine wine investment company, or even like Jeroboam and all the other fine wine merchant, what do you think, what are your suggestions for people who wanted to get in? Is there certain experiences that you think people should get, or qualification, or even personality?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably the number one thing would be knowledge. So I think, especially in fine wine, you have very demanding, as I said, very demanding client base, and they know the wines they want, they know what they're looking for. So it's really, really important to have that familiarity, with the most common most commonly traded fine wines. And that's something that, obviously you can kind of teach yourself. But what I found very useful was, especially working with Jeroboams, like just having that daily contact with fine wine, and having those customers who would come in and ask for these specific wines, which really kind of forces you to learn about them. So I think there's no kind of shortcut around that. Like, you need to put in the legwork, and whether that be spending a bit of time going out there and learning and going to tastings, or even spending a bit of time having a bit of a career change and take a job that might not necessarily be what you want to do, but gives you that contact with fine wine. I think that's really, really valuable. Yeah. And I've seen a lot of people, thinking about my company, a lot of people come into it from the sommelier route. So they've worked in wineries, restaurants with really fantastic wine lists, and they've had those opportunities to have that kind of daily contact with those wines. And then that knowledge base is just so invaluable when you come to apply that to, whether it be selling to the trade or selling to consumers. Like, having that knowledge base, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of knowledge, then, if you have to say like wine qualification, what do you think in terms of your colleagues? I mean, maybe it's an indication. What kind of qualification people have? So is WSET important, or is it the sommelier certificate are important, or they are equal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I can't speak specifically about the sommelier certification because I haven't gone through that process. But certainly for me, WSET has been really useful foundation. So studying levels 2 and 3 quite a few years ago now, but it's still been really useful. And I'm now doing the diploma, which I really recommend. If you want to kind of really move forward in your career, that's a really good route to go down and have a really solid base of knowledge. So I think that's really useful. And also, as I said before, just kind of what you learn on the job is also really handy. Basically kind of is the framework and teaches you how to taste and teaches you everything you need to know about the specific regions. But for fine wine, you probably need to dive a bit deeper and really be looking at who are the top producers in each area. So yeah, definitely WSET is a framework, and then kind of go away and do your own research and try and get that contact with fine wines.
Okay, so I've got all my questions asked. So I don't know if any of our participants has any questions you wanted to ask. This is the opportunity. I'm going to unmute everyone anyway, and then if they're so please feel free, and if you wanted to ask any questions, or if we've covered everything, then what's up? Anyone? Hands up? Any questions? Oh, good.
I think so. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So, Alice, before we go, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of career, thinking a bit more about careers. I think the most important thing I would say is firstly knowledge. Like there's no substitute for getting out there and learning as much as you can. And also, like, don't be shy to ask people. If there's someone in the wine industry who you really admire, who's had an interesting career path, like, don't be shy just to reach out to them and say, I'm interested by what you've done. This is where I'm at. Could I just sit down with you? Or, well, at the moment, I guess it would be a phone call, but like, don't be shy to reach out to people and just kind of find out what they've done.
Yeah, I definitely echo that, because I think, just very quickly before I let everyone go, it's about mentor. I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone has heard about, like, getting a mentor or, someone who you look up to. And yeah, so my first-hand experience was that I went and asked, last Christmas, asked someone who I really admire, I mean, in terms of career. And then I didn't know her. And I just walk up to her in a Christmas party and asked her to be my mentor. And she said yes. And then we had a chat, and I just learned so much. So I think that's just be brave and don't be afraid to ask for, other people that you really admire in terms of career path. And that's really helpful.
Yeah, and just that reminded me of one more thing that I was going to say, which is that I think like networking is so important as well, especially in the wine industry. It's quite a small industry, and when those opportunities do come up, whether it be a social occasion or a tasting event, like make sure you go there and just kind of push yourself. Say, I am going to go up to this person and I am going to talk to them. Don't kind of harass them, but take those opportunities and see what happens.
Okay.
I have a question.
Great.
No, as the wine industry is so small, especially, I know that in the UK you mostly buy, like, which companies, because I did a master's in wine in Italy and Spain, so I got to know a little bit about the wines that they were producing and doing there. And here, like, to get more experience in the wine products, like, how can I approach the wine sales? Like a company, like to become a wine seller, which company would you recommend, or which people do you recommend to approach?
I guess it depends on what kind of role you're looking for. Do you mean like an export manager, or do you mean
It's
more
like an export manager? Yes.
Yeah. I think in that case, like think about what contacts you might be able to make. If you're from Italy, think about what contacts you might be able to make in your own country, and see what if there's a way, if they're looking for representation in the UK, or wherever you're based, like see if there's a way that you could fit that niche, because I think a lot of the time, a lot of the most passionate export managers are people that are from that country or from that region. And I think that really kind of helps promote that product if you have some special connection to that area. So I think that's one route. And it is really difficult, and I can't speak from personal experience of having been an export manager. But I think just getting out there, and now at the moment it's difficult, but try and reach out to people who are doing it at the moment, or
producers
who have done it in the past.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if it's a producer, if it's an export manager, I think producers will be the one to approach. But then if it's the other way around, if you are thinking about opportunities in the UK, so that will be like in buying teams, for example. Those will be the roles to reach out to producers and reach out to export managers as well. So I think this is probably two different sides. But it just depends on where you are based now and what's your plan in future. And I know for a fact that a lot of people here in the UK, they work from probably just get into a wine merchant or wine importer and then work their way up. So, I mean, Alice's experience are quite different, but, I think a lot of people who are actually, just get into a wine importer that you admire, you think this is a good company and with good reputation, and then get in, whatever role that is, and then get in, and then it's normally you can, move out quite quickly normally, yeah. So it is such a diverse industry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Have you had any experience of getting into the judging field for wine events?
This is one for you, Leona, I think.
Oh.
I have, and I know one of our participants is a few of our participants here. I can see. I know they all have. So feel free, everyone, to chip in. So Maya, your question is about how to get into the judging, or
yes?
Okay.
I was approached a little while ago to act as a judge for a sparkling event, but unfortunately it didn't come through because they had a long list of people. But that's something I'd like to get into, but I don't really know how to. I've still got one exam left for my diploma, so nearly there, but otherwise I've got other experience.
Okay, I know, and please feel free to chip in. I know, and Andrea, you have lots of experience in that as well, and other people. I mean, initially for my own experiences, and I started the diploma a long time ago, and I got that a few years back. And then at my time, and IWSC and IWC, they are all looking for associate judges. And then so I started to get my so they are unpaid. Okay, this is very important. I mean, wine judge sounds like a fantastic title, but a lot of them, they pay very little, or they pay you not physical money, but invited you to go to a different country. Everything's paid, but not the salary. And I know the IWC, they pay the judges, the 4 qualified judges, some money as well, but it is not a lot. Okay, so it's all about experiences. So for my own experience, it was that it was I started from associate judges for IWC to get a lot of different judging experience, and then through that I started knowing, it's all about networking again, knowing other people, and then it's because of that, and I got invited to other different judging. I didn't actually then go through the qualification judging thing for IWC. Because I wanted to go to different countries. So for example, then I judged in Poland for a few years. And then I judged in Amsterdam as well. So it is all because of networking, and then you have a bit of like already judging experiences plus some wine qualification, and then normally you will be able to, if you know the right people as well. Networking. Yeah. So that's how. That was my experience, and I don't know if anyone in the the participant wanted to chip in. Andrea,
I'll chip in.
No, you have.
Obviously, my experience when it comes to judging, I was lucky enough to be sommelier for many years, so I was invited to a lot of judging, especially abroad. And I was very lucky to taste wine from all over the world. And unfortunately, as you go on the other side, what I call the darker side, which is the selling of wines, obviously the invitation started to becomes very smaller. But I still judge for the decanter, and I still judge for the drink business. And just to get into the decanter, it took me a good few years, because they wanted to have, they wanted to check his CV and see what you studied and everything, your experience. So obviously, depending on the panel, and depending on if it's a magazine or whatever group it is, they obviously require a certain amount of experience and a bit of knowledge, I would say, whatever they're judging. But it is, it's still a great occasion and a great opportunity to sit down with professionals and share your opinion and experiences when you try wines, and it's a great opportunity, and I highly recommend it.
So I think to echo that, I think sommeliers are quite sort of like you really get a lot of invitation if you are a top sommelier from a very, very well-known restaurant, and so it's all about a bit of your credential, and then let people know you. There are so many people in the wine industry. Everyone wanted to show themselves. So if you imagine if everyone wanted to shout out about themselves and you don't, then no one will notice you. And when then they will not come to you. So I think it's when it goes back to what Alice said as well, networking, and then don't be afraid to sell yourself. I mean, your ability and in terms of your tasting skills, because I think that's the utmost in the criteria. You need to prove to people that you do have the tasting skills.
Thank you.
And I think also, I just wanted to finish on this one, which I find that, very, sometimes when I do this tasting is not what you like, is not your preference, is you need to assess and taste the wine completely independently. And that's why it's very, it's very, for me sometimes, it gets really heavy. And it's almost like, people think, oh, you tasting wines is fun, it's not fun, because you need a huge amount of concentration, a huge amount of, intense, because you need to focus on one wine and just really give all your attention to that. And sometimes, as I said, it's not about what you like, and it's about the wine. Is it good? Is it what you expect? Is it representative variety? And that's it takes a lot of concentration. And sometimes it's like running a marathon. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's definitely a very good experience. However paid or unpaid, I mean, this is a good experience to really refresh your tasting skills.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone
Can
else?
I just ask? Can I just ask on the wine investment side? So obviously, we said is a very I hate the word old-fashioned, but it is quite dominated by Europe. And as you said, Alice, obviously China is coming up as a sort of dark horse in the wine investment. Is there any other countries that are really coming up apart from China?
Yeah, so looking at the data that's coming out of Livex, which is the main trading platform for fine wine. So the best performers recently have been Italy. So a lot of Italian wines performing really, really well, and also California. California has been really rising up the ranks the last couple of years, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. And one is that people are starting to look a bit further afield, and the other reason is that the American appetite for fine wine is huge. And they buy and they collect a lot of their own wine, and as you probably all know, there's a premium to be paid on a lot of Napa wines, and people say, like, is it really worth it, and this kind of thing. But I think that that really kind of driving up of prices is really putting California on the map for investment, definitely. So that's definitely one to watch as well.
And I'm going to finish with this one because I've got another webinar going on as well. If I'm not, if I can afford DRC and Screaming Eagles and the Mouton and stuff like that, what would you recommend to a normal, everyday average Joe who wants to invest some money in wines? Where should they go, basically?
I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities, regardless of where you're at on the scale. And typically for a Oeno Future, we say a minimum of 5,000, 10,000 is best. But there is some flexibility there if you're prepared to do the legwork and really have a look. And I think it tends to be those kind of undervalued regions that are up and coming. There are a lot of producers that are kind of out of reach, like you said, DRC, Screaming Eagle. But if you do your research and kind of look around, and that's obviously what our fine wine team does, you can find those undervalued producers. Now, I would say Italy is a great place to look. Some of the smaller producers that haven't yet maybe reached their peak potential. Barolo. Going really strongly. I'm trying to think of some other ones that we've been dealing with recently. So we have one producer, Gagliardo, who are producing some really fantastic Barolo. And the great thing about that is, it's great to drink, but it also has the benefit if you can wait a little bit, it is going to really increase in price if you can hold on to it for a few years.
So obviously on the investment side as well, does certain wines they gain value. So some wines that don't get this much value, or they're actually losing value?
I mean, it can happen with wines that are overvalued. So I think Bordeaux is a good example where there's been kind of a bit of a bubble, and that's maybe looking like it's bursting. So that can happen. But generally speaking, you know, fine wine, we're talking about very limited quantities being made each year, and it's supply and demand. So as soon as you drink a bottle of, let's say, DRC for sake of argument, as soon as you drink a bottle of DRC, it's gone. And the remaining bottles naturally increase in value as supply is diminishing. So as time goes on, those bottles that you have in your collection are logically going to increase in value if they are sought after, and, you know, people are there in the market that want to buy them. So generally speaking, you know, we see across the board values going up over time.
Okay, so I hope that this covers everything that everyone wants to know. Okay.
Interesting,
and,
yes.
But if there's any more question that you really wanted to, you know, if you're a bit shy and then you wanted to email me, and then I can always get Alice to answer it if you want. Okay. So thank you very much, and then for your time. And we hope to see some of you in our, you know, webinars that's coming in next week and in future. Okay.
And just to say really quickly, like if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn with questions, like feel free. That's absolutely fine.
Thank you.
LinkedIn is
Bye-bye.
everyone. Alright, so have a lovely weekend, and you know, stay safe, stay indoor. Okay.
Yes.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.